Okay, this one's been a long time in coming. Eric, welcome to the show.
How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm doing great. It's fun because we got to catch up a little bit before we started talking here, and I feel like I haven't talked to you in a long time. So it's good to hear how your homestead's doing. But for those in the audience who do not know who Eric Nager is, like, tell us who you are and how you ended up running your own functional medicine clinic and being involved in the preparedness world.
Gotcha. So I guess it goes way back. I started out, well, as far as medicine is concerned. I was an emergency physician at the beginning of my career. Went through residency back in the '90s. Practiced as an emergency physician for over 20 years. Probably back in 2015, I became interested in functional medicine, not knowing that it was a thing. I just went to a conference that was geared towards improving health and nutrition and just your overall life, just for my own edification. And when I went down there, the more I saw what was going on and the more I interacted, I didn't really even know this was a field. And I started talking to other doctors that were there. And when I found out this was something that I could actually do full time, I became enamored with functional medicine, started looking into fellowship programs, found a fellowship program. It took me about 3 years to go through, had to take oral boards and written boards, and then finally graduated from the program. Joined a bigger group around 2019 that wanted a wellness physician as part of their group. And then in 2020, had the opportunity to open my own practice in a gym that I worked out at, and was fortunate enough to open up 2 weeks before the lockdown started. So, perfect timing, right? Like, when would you want to open a practice in the middle of a pandemic?
I bet everybody wanted to come see you in person during March of 2020. Is that correct?
Well, the funny thing is we still really didn't know a lot. I just remember it was, we had to wait to, physically open the practice in May because of contractual obligations. But what's funny is when I had some patients coming to the office, they're like, yeah, I've had this weird cough going on for like a month and I lost my smell and I don't really know what it is. And, at that point, we still really didn't know what was going on. I thought it was just, cold or the flu. And even though I was front line in the emergency department, we still didn't know what was going on. This was all like, we were just finding things out on a day-to-day basis. And, I remember giving some IV fluids to these folks, not realizing that I'm right in their face when they probably had COVID. So, and we did just fine, right? We did just fine. And, but it was just fortuitous timing to open up a brand new business right at the start of this whole mess that began in 2020.
That's how you know you'll be successful, though, right? Because you made it through 2020.
Exactly. So it was a great journey. A lot of it was because I've always been passionate about health and wellness for most of my life. And as an emergency physician, it was a great career. But most of what we do is, very reactive, right? Somebody comes in with a particular symptom or a complaint, and we're giving them a prescription or an intervention to treat what's going on. And functional medicine is very different in that regard. It's a very proactive approach. So what you're trying to do is avoid the problems that would land you in a doctor's office in the first place, right? Like, anything that you can do to improve your health is going to decrease the chance that you're going to end up in a hospital or in a doctor's office at a time when it's not convenient for you.
It's pretty much never convenient to end up in the hospital, as near as I can tell.
I would agree. The more that you can avoid doctors, probably the better off. And of course, this is coming from a doctor. So this is my advice to everybody listening. Do everything that you can to stay away from doctors and hospitals, because it's going to probably serve you better.
So, are you willing to share what the transition out of emergency medicine and into a full-time clinic looked like for you?
Yeah, so like I said, emergency medicine was a great career for me. Very stable. I was an employee, so I was working for the man, so to speak. And when you're an employee, it's a very comfortable situation. You never really have to worry. You always got a paycheck coming for the most part. And going into your own business and as an entrepreneur, as you well know, is it's a big leap. It's a leap of faith. So the fortunate part of all of this is that emergency medicine afforded me the chance to continue working shifts in the ER while I was getting a practice started. So I did have some security and some cushion, so I would still work shifts in the ER when I didn't have office hours. And then I would, as time went on, I slowly transitioned where I spent more time in the office and less time in the emergency department until I finally retired altogether. So I was in a very unique situation where I had a safety net in case things didn't work out. But fortunately, things worked out really nicely.
Yeah, well, I mean, you probably always have that emergency room skill, right? Like even today, I bet you could find a job somewhere if you had to.
No, I mean, the demand is huge. There's a
Mhm.
huge shortage in emergency medicine. Things really changed a lot after COVID. I was still working in the ER when all that was going on. And it was, of my entire 20 plus year career, that was the least enjoyable time of all of it to be in emergency medicine. It was just very stressful. It was the great unknown. We really didn't know at the beginning what was going on. It was just a lot of really bad information out there. And so we were doing our best to cope with it as things were going on. So just the idea of having to just get into decon clothing and not understanding what was infectious or how things were transmitted, and then getting out of a shift and then changing in the parking lot, getting into my underwear, taking my scrubs off, putting them into a garbage bag, and then getting into my car so that I wouldn't bring anything home to my family. That was pretty taxing. And then so you're doing that all day long, getting in and out of decon stuff, putting masks on, not knowing if the test that you had worked. It was pretty stressful. So when I left, it was definitely a good time for me to leave, but it did burn a lot of emergency physicians out. So the field is definitely hurting. For anyone that's gone to an emergency department recently, you probably figured out how bad things are. I mean, when I was there, the wait times were bad, but it's not uncommon to go to an ER, wait 8 hours, 12 hours. Some people are sitting in the ER for 2-3 days waiting for a bed. It's awful.
That's awful. I can't even imagine waiting 2 or 3 days. Like every time we've gone, and we go on the regular for physical injuries because Tactical likes to, cut himself in really new and creative ways and all sorts of stuff. So they usually get him in and out. And I figure it's because he doesn't need a bed usually, and they can get him just the heck out of there and out of their way. So he's usually not there for more than an hour or two, which is pretty good in emergency room timelines.
Yeah, I mean, it's a disaster. Like the last thing I would ever want to do is have to end up in an emergency room as a patient. Given all those years that I worked there, it was sort of a disaster to begin with. If you had a real thing, like if you had a heart attack or you had trauma, you'd get seen right away. But if it's anything else that's not life threatening, which let's face it, that's probably 99% of what comes into an emergency department. Thankfully, they're not life threatening injuries all the time. And that's a thing that a lot of people don't realize. It's like you would think that most of the folks that come into the emergency department are true emergencies. And the reality of it is it's people that cannot get into their primary care doctors. It's people that are being seen for colds. It's people that are being seen for really very minor things that in the past, I think folks might have just tried, taking some Advil if they had a pain here or there, or a Tylenol. And instead of doing that, they become so dependent on the healthcare system that they're just coming in without even trying anything on their own. And then that's what clogs up the system. I mean, it's a lot of folks that could be seen in a well-functioning primary care system, but there's just no room for them because the system is just so overloaded. So they end up there, and then there's no beds to see people who have, real emergencies. And so the wait just gets worse and worse and worse until it is what we see today.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk really quickly about your journey into homesteading and preparedness as well before we move on to functional medicine.
Okay. So, like most folks in the, living free in Tennessee community, I got my start with Jack. I would have to say this was maybe 2010, somewhere around 2010. I think the first episode I ever listened to was Joe Nobody. I just remember that one. That was sort of my entryway, my gateway into the preparedness community. And I got hooked with Jack for many, many years. And, I think I found you through Jack because you were a guest on the show. I found your podcast, and, we became friends, and obviously came to one of the homesteading events down in Tennessee. And I think always been into, always sort of was into preparedness, but didn't really know what that involved. And, listening to TSP and becoming educated little by little, we would get things here or there, and then it dovetailed very nicely into emergency medicine because, fortunately I had that medical part down. Other things that I've done, I've worked for the fire department. I've worked for, I was a member of the SWAT team with the sheriff's office from, let's see, 2006 to 2015. So always had sort of a tactical background as well. Did a lot of work with EMS. So for me, it was a very natural fit. Unfortunately, I was a city boy, so I knew absolutely nothing about homesteading. And we had the good fortune of moving out to a homestead. I guess it was probably about 3 years ago now. We moved I'm in Maryland, so we lived in the city in Baltimore. And oddly enough, we had a little community plot, and we had chickens, but they weren't at our house. They were at the in-laws' house. So we were like sort of dipping our toes into homesteading without really having any spot to do it. And then when we made it out to the area that we live now, we've got a nice 10-acre property where I think we have about 20, 25 chickens minus one that we lost the other day. I've got a tractor for the first time in my life, and I've got a basement full of supplies and all kinds of goodies for the prepping world. But really living the homesteading life and getting that freedom, and having our own garden plots and growing our own food, it's just kind of a dream that's been realized. It's really great.
So you came to my 2020.
I think it was
2021 workshop, and that was fun because we had 2 doctors there. So there was always, and we had a guy giving an herbal medicine presentation in front of 2 doctors, which was not nerve-wracking for him at all.
He did a great job. No,
yeah, it was funny though. But so you came, and later that same year, you heard one of my podcasts where I just was not feeling well, and you reached out to me. And I was really frustrated with the medical system at that point. And you're like, hey, I think I can help you. Let's work together and see if this will work. And I had never heard of functional medicine before. That was my first interaction with functional medicine. And to talk to somebody who's looking to get to the core underlying issue rather than mask the symptom was I was like, this is what I've been looking for my whole life, right? So tell us what functional medicine is, and sort of how that works, and what how you try to help people get to that core underlying issue.
Right. So, I always like to tell my patients when we first meet that functional medicine is nothing more than looking for the root cause of illness. So when somebody comes in and they have a particular complaint or a symptom that's bothering them, rather than just get, a prescription to treat the symptom, if we can figure out the underlying illness or root cause of what's going on and we address that, many times the patient will feel much better and the symptoms will go away. And so that encompasses a lot of things. So when folks come to see me, generally they have been to multiple specialists. We've got some prestigious hospitals that are here in Maryland, like Hopkins and University of Maryland, and they may have seen multiple gastroenterologists or endocrinologists or specialists of from varying fields, and for whatever reason they haven't gotten an answer. Unfortunately, a lot of them just haven't even been heard. With the way things are right now, if you go into your doctor's office, what's that joke that Jack always has? Like the doctor's walking in backwards into the room, and you've got like 2 minutes to talk to them. And so that's the experience that a lot of people have. It's really kind of sad. And even in the emergency department, right? I mean, I only had 5 minutes to talk to patients because I was so busy. I was going from room to room to room that you don't get to really figure out what's going on. You don't get to establish that relationship. And so functional medicine seeks to have a very patient-focused, patient-centered approach. And it means having conversations that are longer than 5 minutes. So what does that entail? Usually the first appointment is about an hour. I used to do 45 minutes for my second appointments. I find that I don't even have the time to do everything that we need to in those 45 minutes. So now, like, the second visit is many times an hour as well. We've got to address sometimes problems that have been going on for years or decades, backtrack and figure out what's been done, and then try to find out new solutions. So when people are coming, many times their goal is to get off of the medications that they've been on for many years, whether that's blood pressure medicines or things for cholesterol, psychiatric medications. They're on a whole slew of different things. And the more medicines you're on, the more side effects you're going to have and the worse you're going to feel. And so when these folks come, what we're trying to do is get to know them, figure out what got them to this place, and then come up with solutions that we work on together. So it's not me telling them you're going to do this or you're going to do that. It's usually me giving them multiple options and saying, all right, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. What are your questions, and which of those resonates with you? and then we move forward. So it's a very kind of a libertarian approach, I think, to healthcare. That's very different than the traditional, almost like authoritarian approach when you go to your doctor and you say, you know, I've got high blood pressure. Okay, here's this prescription for blood pressure medicine. I'll see you in 2 weeks to make sure it's working. So it's a very different feel.
Well, I imagine if I had a stop sign coming out of my spleen, you would advise me to go get surgery for that. So like when there's an
100%.
obvious thing, right? But I see you like, my experience with you has been you're a navigator. So you know things I don't know about um, all of it, but options that I didn't even know exist. And you can tell me like, these are the 3 options that I see. These are my experiences with them. This is where you go find more information. Tell me which one you want to do. And then you don't get mad at me when I take 6 months making up my mind. It's usually not how long I take, but it's just because, those seem like really important. Health decisions seem really important. But, when there's an obvious urgent thing, that's different than if you're like, I have an autoimmune system disorder and I want to address it long term. And you're like, okay, maybe if you got some sleep and exercise and ate right, that would be a great place to start. Oh no, I want a pill, like whatever. But I do see like you're a navigator or a coach who has access to information and a lot of experience that I will never have because I'm not in your field.
And look, and right now, the amount of information that people have is completely overwhelming. I can't tell you how many people that come to the office and they're like, I've been researching this and I'm going down all these rabbit holes and I just don't know what's right. I mean, I read this opinion here and I read this opinion here and I'm on Google and I'm doing this and that. And the next thing you know, they're completely confused and they need somebody to sort of help them separate the wheat from the chaff. And so that's obviously one of the things that I help people with. I had a patient yesterday who had a whole, slew of supplements and she's like, I don't even know if what I'm taking is right. Like I just read about these things and I'm taking them. And is this what I should be taking? And they may not have any medical problems. Some people are just about optimization and trying to kind of just be the healthiest version of themselves. And so a lot of this can also focus on what basic things can you do that don't require medicines? What can you do that's free? And like you said, just sometimes it's just about eating differently or getting exercise or getting out in the sunshine. And I like to joke with patients, if we just lived the way that we did 50 to 100 years ago, you probably wouldn't even need me, right? If we were away from cell phone towers and we were away from, EMF and a lot of the devices that we're dependent on and all the unfortunate, poisonings of our crops with, glyphosate and things like this. If we didn't have all these inputs that were negative, we wouldn't be in the shape that we're in today, unfortunately.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's hard to get away from that stuff.
Darn near impossible. I mean, you can be as clean of an eater as possible, but realistically, you're going to have friends and you're going to go out to a restaurant once in a while. You're going to drink water outside of your house. So the thing is we're never going to get away from a lot of the things that are problematic. So what you try to do is just mitigate them, right? You do your best to mitigate these things, to live as cleanly and as healthily as possible. And if you do that, the chance of misfortune goes down. It's never going to be zero, but the reality is you can mitigate a lot of these things. And so whether it's stress and it seems, I don't know why, but the stress levels seem to be about as high as I've ever encountered them. The amount of folks that are having stress related to jobs and the amount of time that they have to spend is staggering. And I tell all of them, I said, look, I'm never going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to say quit your job. This is something you have to do because it's making you miserable. But you really need to have some introspection into work-life balance. If you're working, 80 to 100 hours a week, and you're exhausted and you're miserable where you're at, what's your financial situation? Is there anything else you can do? Is there another job responsibility within the company? Is there something else that you can do? Because if you're waiting to collect that pension in 5 years and you're killing yourself, what's your life going to be like afterwards? And so a lot of it is just focusing on things like that, things that we can do that we have in our control and in our power to affect changes in your health, for sure.
Yeah, it feels like to me, the system is currently set up to cause us to feel as much stress as possible. That's what it feels like. Because I work for myself because I decided not to have a heart condition related to a job that wasn't working for me. And
Hmm.
now I'm like, now I'm going to work myself into that at this job that I'm building for myself. And I feel like it's, if I take on too much about what's going on out there, that's when I start having problems personally. So it's interesting when you realize how stressful it is all the time. Like needing to be constantly available to people. We don't really need to, actually. But you have to figure out how to set that boundary, which can be hard because people expect it now.
The power of no.
Yeah. I'm working on it. I'm working on that. That's my word of the year almost, except for it's not my word of the year. I'm about to have a cat meltdown in my office. Okay. So, not all functional medicine doctors are the same. Like, what is that?
Holy smokes.
I've been watching this grow for 20 minutes where one cat was stalking the other cat the whole time. I texted Tactical. I'm like, come get the cat. Okay. Anyway, so how do you evaluate the quality of a functional medicine specialist? Because now it's kind of turning into a buzzword, which then means not every interaction is going to be the same quality, I don't think.
Right, right. So, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, there really aren't a lot of us out there. And so it isn't one of these things like you're going to find us in a minute clinic in Walmart or anything like that anytime soon, because but I do think that the demand is growing, and it's really interesting. In my neck of the woods, I have people coming to me from Delaware, from Pennsylvania, from New Jersey, from New York. I had one woman call me from California, which I couldn't understand. I'm like, is there nobody in your neck of the woods that does this between here and California? And what that tells you is we are difficult. There's not enough of us to go around. Basically, it's not that we're difficult to find, but right now I think a rare commodity. And the folks that come for functional medicine are, in general, there's some interesting characteristics. They're not looking for an easy button, right? Like when the majority of the American public goes for healthcare and they're told that they have high blood pressure or they have high blood sugar or whatever it is, it's a prescription, right? That's the easy button. Okay. You don't have to change anything, right? You don't have to stop eating Oreos. You don't have to get out there and exercise. You don't have to get yourself in the sunshine. Here's a pill and it's going to fix things. And with functional medicine, that is generally not the case. And, I often tell patients, it took you a while to walk into the forest. It's going to take you a while to walk out. And so this is it's not for everybody. The people that come are individuals that understand that there's going to be some patience with the process. It takes time to suss out details. If you have active problems that have been there for years or decades, we can't fix that in a couple of weeks. It's just not going to happen. And I try to be very candid with folks that, if you're patient with me and you give me some time, we'll get you feeling better. But you have to be patient with the process, understanding that it may take a while and that there has to be buy-in, right? There has to be personal responsibility. And that's something that unfortunately is in short supply these days in general. But I think that the patients that come to see me are much more open to that concept. I think that when you're looking for a functional medicine physician, what should you be looking for? Number one, it should be somebody who can listen, right? They should be able to spend time listening to what you're saying and allowing you to get out whatever is on your mind. Because I'll tell you that the overwhelming majority of the patients that come to see me, one of their comments afterwards is, I felt heard for the first time. Somebody actually listened to me. So whoever you find should be somebody that there's adequate time with that appointment. So you're looking at appointments that should last 60 to 90 minutes. Very different than a primary care doctor visit, right? You're not in and out in 5 minutes. Secondly, understand that there's going to be lab work that's going to be involved in the process. I'm very much a proponent of not spending people's money on unnecessary tests, because in the functional medicine world, there are an unending amount of tests, many of which are very, very expensive. Talking anything from lab work, if you had to pay out of pocket, if you were going to a lab, you might pay $2,000 or $3,000 for some of that blood work. I mean, that's a pretty big expenditure if you don't have insurance. Many of the functional lab tests that are out there, insurance studies doesn't even cover, unfortunately. And what are those lab tests? Those are lab tests that actually have some clinical utility, things that are very difficult to diagnose, things like Lyme disease or mold illness. those are not things that we have traditional tests that work very well for. And so many times there'll be out-of-pocket expenses for that. So I don't want people to go into this thinking that they're going to have to drop a boatload of money. That shouldn't be the take-home point, but understand that there will be a fair amount of testing. I do everything that I can to get most of it covered under patient's insurance, but understanding that there may be tests that you have to do that are not covered by insurance, and sort of going in with that open mind, I think helps out. Lastly, I don't think that whoever you go to should be telling you what to do. I'm very much kind of a libertarian mindset in general, and I think I bring that to my medical practice. I always give patients options. I want them to decide, mainly because I want them to have buy-in. I want them to understand that the decisions that they make are going to have a clear-cut benefit in their health. And if I'm just telling them what to do, it's just like telling your kids what to do. It's like, you need to go downstairs, you need to get your PT done for the day so that you're a better hockey player. If I'm ordering them to do it and they're not doing it on their own, there's going to be no buy-in. There's not going to be that passion for it. So I think that having somebody that gives you options and that is listening to you and is willing to think outside the box and give you the freedom to make the decisions on your own, I think that's very empowering for patients. And I think it does a lot of good for helping with their medical condition, because ultimately, if they're not buying into the plan, it's never going to work. So
yeah, that's a big thing. My sister works as a physical therapist, and she said the patients that have to pay something for the appointments usually heal faster than the ones that have it completely covered under something like a workman's comp claim or
for
something.
sure.
And
Yeah.
she's like, and I think it's 100% like mental at that point. Like it's not that there isn't a physical problem to begin with, but the sticking to it is like, well, I just put my money into this, so now I'm there 100%. So
having some skin in the game definitely helps, right? So if you're and it's funny because in the emergency department, we would give people discharge instructions, and they've studied this, and they found that the overwhelming majority of people who go to the ER, they just take the discharge instructions and throw them in the trash as soon as they leave. They don't even look at them. It's like, and then fortunately, most of them are going to get better anyway. But if they don't get better, right, they had no idea. Like, you're supposed to do, step A, B, and C in order to follow up after you leave the emergency department. But I think when people are invested and they have a little bit of skin in the game, they're far more likely to reap the benefits of the plan, because they are definitely involved and invested in the situation for sure.
So then how would you say that functional medicine overlaps with prepping?
So we always say prepare for the worst, hope for the best, right? And so same thing with medicine, right? Nobody ever wants to, have a heart attack or develop cancer or have to be on a whole bunch of medications because their health is no good, or like work their entire life for retirement just to have something debilitating happen to them. I think one of the tenets of functional medicine is being very proactive, right? Just like prepping, right? We're hoping that we don't have, the end of the world as we know it, right? We don't want that. No, I don't think anybody really wants that. But if you have some systems in place, you're going to be much, much better prepared to deal with whatever comes your way. So, with your health, if we're talking about, decreasing sugar and processed foods and fried foods, and doing your best to grow your own food so that you know what's in it, and cooking at home to the best of your ability, and exercising with some regularity. If you're doing those basic things that, by the way, usually don't cost you anything. I mean, they're just, you'd be spending that money on food anyway. If you're doing those things, you're getting a good foundation for your health that's going to protect you, well into later life. And it's an insurance policy. So going to a functional medicine physician, many times you'll find out things that you didn't even know, because some of the testing may be more in depth. So it may be that you just got some very basic blood work at your family doctor, and you were told that things were sort of like, okay, maybe on the higher end of borderline, but they weren't, but they were normal. So everything was okay. But you just don't feel right. Something doesn't feel right. You don't feel like the best version of yourself. Something isn't right. And, every time you tell somebody that, the answer is, no, you're fine. Or here's an antidepressant. You're just sad, right? You just need an antidepressant.
No, you're over 50, so you're just supposed to hurt.
Oh yeah, where you're 65 and you don't need to have sex anymore. Like, what do you need to do that for? I mean, I and these guys are looking at, they're coming into my office like, is he out of his mind? I still love my wife and this is something I want to do. And so it's these crazy statements. It's like, yeah, you're 50. So, it's okay to just feel like, trash most of the time because that's how everybody feels. But the reality is that's not how it should be. I mean, there's absolutely no reason why you can't have these later years feeling better than you did when you were younger, as long as you're doing a lot of the right things. So when we do testing, most of what I tell the patients is I never want my patients to be normal. And I think you and I had this discussion when we met, right? Like you have all these lab tests, right? And you get this big report back and you see that your blood sugar is, I'm just going to throw numbers out there. It's within normal limits, right? It's 99. But I never want my patients to be normal. I always want them to be optimal. And what does optimal mean? It means that there's been medical literature out there that has shown that certain lab tests correlate with better outcomes. So, for instance, with blood sugar, for every tick above 85, for every number above 85, it increases the risk of cardiovascular disease. So if you have a and the high end of normal is say 99. So you could have a blood sugar of 99 and your doctor would tell you, it's not a big deal. That's normal. But the literature says otherwise. It says you're putting yourself at increased risk for cardiovascular disease. So can you do something about that? Can you decrease carbs in your diet? Can you get rid of unnecessary sugars? Maybe you want to engage in like keto or something like that, or exercise more, whatever it is to help bring that blood sugar down. And then the next time that you go, hopefully, you're in a better range. And this goes for everything from sex hormones to thyroid hormone to cholesterol levels. There's these big ranges across the board. And so understanding what your numbers look like and interpreting them in a way that gets you the best health outcomes is going to prepare you for better health as you age. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits that I can give to patients is sort of giving them the awareness of what these labs look like, explaining to them why certain numbers, while they are quote unquote normal, are not doing them any favors. Right? We need to do something about that. Letting somebody stay pre-diabetic for years and doing nothing about it until they become diabetic is not helping them. It's basically setting them up for failure across the board. So if we can give them tools, many of which are not medications, I always start out with diet and exercise and lifestyle considerations. And then I offer them, if they want a prescription, I will give them a prescription. If they want a supplement, I'll give them ideas. There are generally a lot of ways to skin a cat. And so they'll have multiple ways that they can address these things without being hemmed in to just like one option.
That's really cool. Okay, so going tactical here. Something you and I were chatting about a while ago was, it was after I had a bloody medical emergency with tactical, because he's always the root of the medical emergency, just so we have that clear. And I realized I had things in 3 different places because I had all the gauze with the gauze, like I had things by what they were. And you're like, no, you need to have the kit that does all the things. So like, how would you start organizing things you have in your in storage to deal with medical issues that can come up? Because on a homestead, I feel like you need a more advanced knowledge of first aid than most people, because you are exposing yourself to more dangerous situations like chainsaws and thorns and rocks that you can crush your fingers with and all these other things. And the tractor, like the tractor can hurt you if you do it wrong. So like, how would you advise people to start rethinking how they store things, who are used to storing like all the tomato sauce there, all the gauze there, all the Band-Aids there, all the sterilizers there in a row?
Right. Now, so having things sort of convenient and where you can access them is the first thing. And you don't have to get super, high speed on all of this stuff. I mean, honestly, just having like a boo-boo kit, quite frankly, is just a good place to start. You can, go on Amazon and get one of those like tackle boxes that have like individual places for different things, and start with something like that for your car. Think about the things that you would need on a regular basis, or that you have needed, and just create a very simple kit that doesn't cost you a lot of money. Right. So in my vehicles, I have something like that. There's Band-Aids, there's gauze pads, there's Quick Clot, right, for helping out with, bleeding. There is, I've got caffeine for energy in case I have a long trip and I'm getting tired on the way home and I'm worried there's no place to stop for a good cup of coffee. Nicole's coffee is nowhere to be found. So, and all I've got is sheets around, which just, they suck. But things like that you would use on a regular basis. If you like Tylenol for headaches, if you don't like Tylenol, you could use curcumin. Start by just, getting the things that you would use commonly and putting them in a space where it's convenient for you. So if you happen to get a cut on your finger and you're bleeding, you've got a Band-Aid, you've got some gauze. Start there. You don't have to get terribly sophisticated for that. Then you can add on to that for things, in your house. So if you're on a homestead, like you said, things are going to happen. All right. Now here's a joke, right? So from somebody who's been an emergency physician for over 20 years, a prepper who thinks he knows what he's doing. We got bees on our homestead, right? I don't think I mentioned this. I'm now a beekeeper. Okay. So we've got bees, but we had those crazy wasps. I think you and I talked about this, that are tremendous. They're like an inch or two long. I don't know what they're called.
Yeah,
but
like I forget, like the European wasp, or there's some name for them. It's not European.
Yes.
A friend of mine had those and they were awful.
They're huge. And fortunately, I never got stung by one, but my wife did. And so she came in and she got stung and she doesn't have an allergy to anything. Like she never had an anaphylactic reaction to bee stings or anything like that. But this day she came in and she was screaming. She's like, my whole body is on fire. And she started getting hives on her skin, which was very unusual because she never had this before. Now here I am, like the ultimate medical preparedness guy, right? I didn't have, and she's crazy with needles, by the way. Like she would not let me use an EpiPen on her, right? So I had EpiPens downstairs. She's like, you're not sticking me with that. So then I had to go downstairs to my prep room and rip everything apart. I'm ripping my SWAT bag apart. I'm looking through medications that I had to just find like a little vial of epinephrine. Then I had to find a syringe and a needle because I wasn't prepared for that. I had an EpiPen, but she wasn't going to let me use it on her. So here I am. My room looked like a complete hurricane when everything was done. I had everything I needed. I just had to get it. Now, fortunately, I had plenty of time. I had given her some supplements to take and some sort of homeopathic things that work really well. So we put comfrey on the actual bee sting. We used some supplements that have quercetin and stinging nettle that can help with mast cell degranulation. That's the part of your immune system that sort of gets activated when there's an allergic reaction, and some natural antihistamines. So I gave her a bunch of those to take. By the time I had everything taken out of the bag, fortunately, everything was under control. I didn't need to hit her with the EpiPen or the Epi that I had. We didn't have to call 911, but we were a hair's breadth away. I said, all right, well, that's never going to happen again. So I immediately went through all the medical supplies, looked at the expiration dates. So I went through all the supplies, figured everything out, looked at expiration dates, and actually got myself a nice, bright yellow container from Amazon. And it is now the anaphylaxis box that is sitting in my bathroom that everybody in my family knows how to get it. Okay. This is something that I probably should have had years ago, but nobody in my family has really bad allergic reactions, but you never know. And this is one of those weird situations that I thought I was prepared for, but clearly I was not. So I've rectified that. And I've got that taken care of. So that's another key one. That one you'd probably have to work with your family doctor to procure the medical supplies and hopefully have somebody that's open-minded. And then these days you can get needles and syringes and everything on Amazon, and you can go on YouTube and learn how to do injections. So, is that the best way to do it? Probably not. It'd be best to maybe take an organized class where you learn how to do these things, but it's certainly not outside the realm of possibility for the average individual to do something like that. If you want to get even more advanced, going into sort of the tactical medicine aspect of things, I've got tourniquets in my vehicles as well. So, and I have them staged at various places in the house. God forbid there's like a home invasion or something like that. The kids all have tourniquets. We've done drills in the house where I have them at the dinner table, and I say, then I'll tell them, you were just shot in your left leg. Apply a tourniquet. We'll play this game, which they don't like very much, by the way. I love the game, but they don't like it. And then whoever loses has to do burpees. So that gives them a little bit of incentive to try to get that on. So we've done things like that to just sort of drill them on how to apply a tourniquet. So my kids know how to do that. And we have tourniquets staged in different areas. But you don't have to get really that crazy. I mean, if you just think about the things that can happen on a day-to-day basis, whether you're in a homestead, you're in your house. I mean, the reality is we can all get cut. We can all fall. We can all get injured in different ways. And you just want to have something that is simple and easy to get at. So if you had nothing more than a little box that had 4x4s, gauze pads, some tape, some anesthetic, some alcohol preps, things like that, just to clean up some basic wounds, that's fine. If you're looking from a functional medicine standpoint about some things that I like to have on hand for day-to-day things that could go on. So many individuals do not like taking prescription pain medications or maybe even over-the-counter medicines. Things like ibuprofen and Aleve are available to everybody, but they're not necessarily benign. And there's a lot of individuals who can't take that stuff, right? If they have bleeding issues, if they're on Coumadin, if they're allergic to it, if they have stomach ulcers, like you can't really take those medications. So if you want something that is just as effective and more of a natural approach, I love to have curcumin, which is the same thing as turmeric. You generally want to get that in a pill form. You don't want to have like a shaker bottle of turmeric that you would use in your cooking, because while it's tasty to make chicken tikka masala with something like that, you may not, you're going to have to take a whole lot of it in order for it to have an effect. So just having some capsules of curcumin around is great because look, we all get aches and pains from time to time. We all get injured from time to time. And if you take those, there's virtually no downside, and just about everybody can take them. Having some comfrey on hand is great, especially on the homestead. We grew comfrey plants years ago and then just took them and threw them into some olive oil and heated them up and created our own comfrey, salve and stew, just liquid basically that we keep in a nasty jar upstairs in my bathroom. My kids all know that when they get hurt, the comfrey's coming out and it smells awful, but it works like, I hate to use the word, it does work like magic, right? It does really work. So that's a great first aid solution to have on hand. If you're, we all from time to time, we're going to get sick. I mean, we're in the middle of cold and flu season now, and who knows what else. Having things on hand when other folks are getting sick is not a bad idea to have a proactive approach. So I like to have vitamin C and vitamin D in the house. If you have kids, you may need to have chewable or powder that dissolves in liquid so that the kids can take it if they're not old enough to take capsules. For adults, vitamin C, incredibly safe. You can take pretty high doses of vitamin C without really any downside. I mean, the only downside is you can get loose stools. We actually, sometimes even use vitamin C to help with constipation. But you can take lots and lots of vitamin C. It's water soluble, so you're not going to hurt yourself by taking it. Vitamin D, there has been tons of studies on using vitamin D in medical settings, like in nursing homes and things like that. And you can take fairly high doses of vitamin D for short periods of time, like 5 to 7 days. And you were talking, some of the medical studies have shown as high as 50 to 70,000 units a day. So that's a substantial amount of vitamin D, but that vitamin D can rev up your immune system and help out. So if you're at the very beginning of something, or you're trying to ward off something that you sense is happening, getting a heavy duty dose of vitamin D and vitamin C is not a bad strategy. Zinc is something that you can use as well. It has antiviral properties. Generally, you're looking at somewhere between 50 and 100 milligrams of zinc a day. You probably want to take that with quercetin. Quercetin helps the zinc to get into the cells so that it is more effective. So they call it an ionophore. So you'd want to use some quercetin, usually 500 milligrams, 2-3 times a day. You can go higher than that, but that would be a basic way of doing things. So that's kind of a nice way to just address colds, right? In the middle of cold season, just to have some of those things on hand in case you're feeling under the weather or somebody in your house is sick and you're trying to ward off the bad juju. There are some, there's a myriad of different supplements out there, probably beyond the scope of what we have time for today.
We could do a whole episode on supplements that you might want to have on hand and how they're used. That would be a very interesting show.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's easy enough to do because there's so many different things out there that have virtually no downside. They're incredibly safe, and many of them are just based on plant medicine. Things like using, aloe for stomach issues, and this is stuff that's tried and true, has been medically studied. So, most of what I do with functional medicine is, if I'm going to recommend a supplement to somebody, I want to make sure, number one, that it's safe, right? I don't want to have any harm come to somebody with something natural or otherwise. I don't want them to have, I don't want a negative outcome. Secondly, I want to see that it's actually something that's useful. Ultimately, I'd like to see something that's been medically studied. If there's medical literature on it, that gives credence that there's something to this, understanding that there's really no money in it. We know how the world works, right? Like pharmaceutical companies, they fund most of these studies nowadays because they want their drugs to pass muster so they can make some serious dough on whatever medication they're coming out with. But ultimately, there's no money in it for a lot of these things. Like there's nobody doing studies on vitamin C, right? Because who's going to make the money on it? It's been out forever. You can't turn it into a drug, so it's just not going to happen. But if there's enough anecdotal evidence and that's out there, at least in case reports, that will work as well. And that's kind of how I make my distinction about when I'm going to recommend something to somebody or not.
That makes sense. Okay. We have a little bit of time left. And you mentioned that you read Outlive about a year ago. Mm-hmm. And I just finished the book. Like, you willing to share your thoughts on that one? Because that absolutely really changed my perspective on some things.
Yeah. So Peter Attia is an interesting guy. Years ago, I listened to a bunch of his podcasts, and, to be perfectly honest, I wasn't crazy about the guy. I mean, he's a very, very smart individual, but he had a sort of an all or none approach to a lot of things. Like you could only do the ketogenic diet, and that's the only thing that you could do. And statins were the way to go. And it was the only way to treat cholesterol, and you had to use statins. And he was a very all or none kind of individual. So that kind of turned me off, even though he was very smart and he very knowledgeable about a lot of topics. It didn't check a lot of boxes for me with some of these things. So I read Outlive, I think it was last year. And I got to say, it changed my perspective on the guy. Like, I went from not liking him to actually liking a lot more about him. I wouldn't tell you that I agree with everything. He's definitely coming around. So for those of you who haven't read it, the book is called Outlive. And the gist of it is it gives you a number of strategies to be as healthy as you can outside of the standard healthcare system. I think he terms it, healthcare 2.0?
3.0.
3.0.
Yeah.
And it's a very different approach. And his whole philosophy is getting you to he coins the term the centenarian Olympics, or decathlon. I'm sorry. And what that involves is being able to grow old and be able to do many of the things that you would take for granted, right? Being able to climb a set of stairs, take your groceries out of your car to your house, sit on the floor with your grandkids and be able to play with them, and then be able to get up on your own. And so he gives you lots of strategies to accomplish those goals. So I think a lot of the take-home points, you and I think we probably agree on this, is, eating in a healthier fashion, and the absolute incredible role of exercise with health. And I think the one thing that book changed for me was my training sort of taught me initially that nutrition was number one. Like that was 70 to 80% of the whole game, and everything else was sort of icing on top. I think one of the things that book changed for me was my focus is now a lot more on exercise than it is on nutrition. Not that nutrition is by any means not important, but I was beginning to see trends in individuals that I knew. Like I'd go out to dinner with them and I'm looking at what they eat, and it's horrible. Okay. They're eating, fried foods, or, lots of stuff that I wouldn't consider healthy, but I'm looking at them and they look great. They look younger than their stated age. There's something about them that looks youthful. And I'm like, wait a second, this person's not eating healthy. So, I'm this is something I'm fascinated with. I'll ask them lots of questions to try to figure out what is it about that individual that makes them look so youthful, and that their not only their appearance, but just their ability to move and live life. And what I was beginning to see was that many of them were athletes, if not currently in their when they were younger, and having a very active life, either as a youth or currently, was providing them with benefits that were visible, that anybody could see. And so it made me really rethink a lot of what I was originally my original thoughts about this, that nutrition was absolutely number one. Now beginning to think that exercise is at least as important, if not as important, as nutrition in staying youthful and staying healthy and ensuring that you'll get into those later years with less problems. Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no. So
I decided I was doing exercise wrong, because the way he broke down kinds of exercise related to basically mobility goals or mental mobility goals into your old age, I was like, oh, I do that all the time, and I don't do that at all. For example. Right. And I thought, okay, what I'm learning is I need to be more varied and pay attention to all of the categories rather than just do the thing I like to do, which is swim laps.
Yeah, I mean, we all get comfortable with a form of exercise, right? But I'm really, fitness has always been something I've been very passionate about. But when I have patients that come in that aren't used to working out, like all they do is walk, and I'll tell patients, look, I'm really happy that you walk, because it's definitely better than being sedentary, no doubt about that. But I don't think any of us should be fooling ourselves into thinking that walking is exercise, because it's not. I mean, if you're walking up a hill, if you're walking with a ruck on, okay, you could say that that's exercise. But generally speaking, if all you're doing is walking your dog for half an hour a day, that's not going to get you to the finish line. Not by a long shot. You need to be a bit more engaged in that. And so I don't want them to go from 0 to 60 and start doing, Olympic lifting, but I would love it if they lifted something heavy from time to time, right? Because we all need to do that at some point. Even if you're not going to a gym, you may want to lift your kid or your grandkid, off the ground. If you're living on a homestead and you got to move a rock, right? Like, we need to do things that we were meant to do. And I think from an ancestral standpoint, one of the things that we're good at is lifting heavy things and then carrying loads for long periods of time. There's a great book called The Comfort Crisis. I don't know if have you read that one?
No, I haven't, but I'll check it out.
So that one is, the premise of that one is that we've become way too comfortable with our lives, right? Like, we're in these climate controlled atmospheres all the time, and we don't have enough things that are challenging to us. And as human beings, we need things to challenge us. We need to not be comfortable all the time. And he talks about him going on this hunting trip to the Arctic and everything that he had to do to prepare for it. And then one of the take-home points that I got out of the book was that rucking is tremendously valuable for your health. And rucking is nothing more than walking by carrying a heavy load either on your back or like a weight vest or something like that. And it's incredibly helpful for you. So that's a big thing that I changed in my own fitness routine, and that I recommend to patients to do with regularity, to get out there and because you're out in nature, you're getting exposed to the sunshine. Hopefully, you may do it with somebody, you may not, so you get a little socialization if you're with somebody, but it's just another tool in the toolbox that you can utilize.
Yeah, and if you are rucking in the woods, you might find some wild edible plants that are super helpful. That's actually why I find them a lot, is I like to go up into the woods. I think it's also important for people to start where they are. And so I can see why nutrition seems first. If somebody is 400 pounds and gets winded walking from the couch to the TV, definitely you want to start moving. But if you can start with nutrition and reduce some of that weight, it makes the exercise easier.
100%.
Like, that's a different, like, I know somebody who started at, I think, 350 pounds about a year ago, and she's lost a ton of weight. And she said she couldn't walk to the mailbox and back without stopping to take a break when she started. Wow. And she's done both the food side and the exercise side. But I think that's why, like, so Dr. Barry will always say, start with the diet and get that clean, and then the exercise will start being easier.
Nothing wrong with that approach either. I mean,
Yeah.
look, there's a lot of ways to approach this, and everybody's going to be different with what they're
Yeah.
able to do or not do. And if you can't walk to the mailbox, okay, fair enough. Clean up your diet. All right, that get rid of the soda, get rid of some of the processed stuff. If sometimes there's a lot of low hanging fruit that's very easy for you to get to, and I think that's a fine philosophy as well. Nothing
Yeah,
wrong
and then
with that.
also walk to the mailbox every day, and then walk to it twice, and then like all of those things.
Walk around your dining room table.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many different things, but doing a little something every day that gets you towards that goal is a great place to start. If you're like, okay, I want to lose 300 pounds, right? And I'm 500. You got to start somewhere, right? The journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. So make it a small step, make it something that you can gain a victory with. So whether it's cleaning up your diet, getting more active, doing both, those are going to be the secrets to longevity, right? There's not just one solution. I mean, there are many spokes on the wheel, but those two are foundational. And the nice thing is neither one of them costs you a penny. You can do all that stuff for free.
It costs you time. That's it. But
for sure,
it's worth the time. Like, where can you cut time that is not healthy for you?
right.
Like, I always look at it this way, like, as far as like paying for things like a functional medicine set of lab works or whatever, I'm like, well, if I get sick, I can't work. If I get super sick. And so I might as well spend money now on that rather than something that's making me sicker, like more alcohol in my life. So I'll just make that choice. But that can be really hard for people who feel like they're at the edge of their budget. But the thing is, your budget opens up as you get healthier. And that's a hard sell, I think. But as you feel better, you have more energy to do more things, and those things create value in your life, whether it's quality relationships with people around you or money that you're making. So,
yeah, well said.
Yeah. Okay. Well, tell everybody how they can connect with you, and we'll wrap up.
I'm not a huge social media guy, surprise, surprise. But I mean, I have an Instagram page for putting things out once in a while when I do a funny workout or I do something kind of cool. But for the most part, so I'm located in Maryland. The name of my practice is Opti Health Institute. So you can do an internet search from my website. I do telemedicine as well. So for folks who can't make it to my office, we have that as an option for them as well. And this is my passion. It's a friend of mine told me about a term, Friday night essence, and I had no idea what that term meant. And essentially, it's what you would be doing on a Friday night if you had your druthers to do anything. And I'm often sitting and reading medical books and figuring out different ways to optimize my health, or reading things like Outlive or any of these other books because I just love it, and I love sharing the message with people on a daily basis. So I really appreciate you having me on, so we can spread a little bit of the healthy message to folks.
All right, guys, check out Opta Health if you're looking, because I'm just saying, it's you've gotten to know Eric really well over the course of this interview, and thank you so much for being on today.